here earlier, but noting it's 9:01, and I'm sure the treasurer will be here shortly. I know he has staff here. So with that, Anthony, maybe we can just get started.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I believe we can do a quick roll call for a quorum to get started.
Perfect.
Commissioner Racines? Here. Commissioner Pope?
Here.
Commissioner Revel?
Here.
Commissioner Naves?
Excused?
Commissioner Wallace?
I guess excused.
And Commissioner Meyer?
And I'm sure he will join us shortly, and I'm here.
And Chairman Gordon, thank you. You have a quorum. So thank you for the team. We've got a few new faces in here who helped us up the room this morning, so thank you for all your assistance. It looks like we are live. Are we also recording? Perfect, thank you. We've got the closed captions and transcription running as well. Beautiful, thank you so much. A few quick announcements as always to kick us off here. Agendas and sign-in sheets are in the back of the room, so if you are here in person, please do fill those out. We appreciate it. And my disclaimer, key decisions pertaining to the Wyoming Stable Token Initiative will be made by the commissioners of the Stable Token Commission or the state legislature in public meetings such as this. At this time, no blockchain has been selected for deployment of Wyoming stable tokens, and no Wyoming stable tokens have been issued. Further, the only commissioners are those appointed by statute, the governor, or a majority vote of the commission. Information outside of these public meetings should only be considered factual and legitimate if it is distributed through our official channels. At this time, these are limited to our website at stabletoken.wyo.gov, the Wyoming legislature website at wyoleg.gov, and our social media channels with the @WyoStable username on Twitter, YouTube, GitHub, and Warpcast. I do have one other quick announcement today. I can't see her on the call right now, but I'd like to quickly welcome Deborah Brooks as our new Chief Risk and Compliance Officer. Deborah has joined the commission following an impressive tenure at the New York Department of Financial Services, where she served as the Deputy Virtual Currency Chief and Head of Supervision, and led critical regulatory initiatives in the evolving digital asset space. As part of her oversight, Deborah constructed compliance frameworks for blockchain analytics and stablecoins. And with us, Deborah will be developing and enforcing risk and compliance protocols, aligning the commission and the Wyoming stable token with applicable regulations while mitigating potential risks. Her experience at NYDFS, where she built and streamlined internal supervision policies, will be instrumental in helping the commission launch the first fiat-backed, fully reserved stable token issued by a state. And Mr. Chairman, I would note that the treasurer, Commissioner Meyer, is here.
I was going to make that comment. Thank you.
Excellent. So without further ado, I know we want to keep today's meeting on a bit of a tighter schedule. I would quickly review the agenda, and then we could dig into it from there.
Sounds fine. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So after going through today's agenda, we will go through the meeting minutes from our last discussion. We'll go through the budget review for the month ending September 30th. The contact list is just quickly, I uploaded that to your folders for the commissioners. We don't have that as a printout. It's getting a little bit unwieldy for that. We'll talk about the updated website, where we stand on our recruiting of a CFO and CISO, and we'll try to lock down some dates for our 2025 commission meetings. We'll do a quick industry update. We'll hear from our working group leads as we go through the technology subcommittee and operations subcommittee reviews. We'll talk about what comes next for additional subcommittees to be stood up, as well as where we're going to have some legal support, hopefully in the near future. We'll spend a few minutes on procurement. I know there's a lot of discussion at our last conversation around the timeline, and I want to put everything down on paper and have a conversation about, what is possible for us to move forward with, as well as make sure we are good to go with extending our procurement rule set through the anticipated procurement process. We'll cover off on what comes next from a meetings perspective and tasks. We'll have public comment, and then we will wrap up. So, Mr. Chairman, if that's all right with you, sometimes we formally approve the agenda, sometimes we don't. If just based on the timeline for today, I'll leave it up to you.
I'll say without any kind of objection, I would be happy to just move forward. I think we have consensus. Let's just proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on in our list here, next item is the meeting minutes from our last discussion on December 19th, the meeting we had in Laramie. To quickly just review these at the 10,000-foot level. This is an opportunity to introduce Stephanie Chan, who joined as our Senior Business Project Manager earlier that week. We approved the July and August minutes, did our standard reviews, the budget summary, contact list as well. Went through the discussion I had had earlier in that week with the Select Committee. We approved an increased spending authority that's reflective of our updated budget for this new biennium. And we had a high-level discussion about roadmap and timeline, which I'd like to break down a little bit further this morning as we go through the documents around procurement. And we went through FAQs that are now hosted on our website after a couple of revisions to those. So those are the meeting minutes. I will leave it to the commission if we go forward from there.
Yeah, thank you. If there are any revisions, notes, and comments, I'll take those now. If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes. And for the record, I'd also note that Commissioner Wallace has joined us.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to accept the minutes from September 19th, 2024.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Is there support for that motion?
I would second that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Pope. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to our monthly budget review. Again, this will be the longer sheet of paper you have in front of you. This is still the detail version of these files. Come next month, we'll have the summary view because we'll have more data, but for now, there's really just not much in here. You could see that this is the spend so far is predominantly being driven by salaries. You'll see that Steph's salary is hit for about half of September based on when she came on board. One thing I will note here is if you look at the top of this sheet, right down the middle where it's September expenditures, that top row, permanent positions. In my review of this with A&I, we detected a slight issue where the new members of the team were classified as permanent positions instead of AWEC positions. So that has been identified and that'll be remediated, if not in the October financials, then certainly in November. And generally speaking, you can see some scalar charges around technology where we brought new team members on. Again, we expect to see a bump next month when Deborah's tenure begins to impact our financials, and we will go from there. There's also a bit of travel on here, myself going to DC, and then we also had Flavia in DC at one point as well, and I believe that would also cover the DC trip that I was on for with Devin to meet with several different agencies. So if there's no further questions on the financials for September 30th, happy to continue moving forward.
Any questions, comments? Have we approved those before? I don't believe we have. We've just taken them. That's correct. Let's do
Correct,
that.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the list is, again, the contact list. This has become fairly unwieldy. So this is something I've delivered to you all virtually. You have it in Drive in your respective folders. Yeah. Net is becoming, again, a lengthier list. The same story as the last several months. It's not myself reaching out at this point. It's inbound, which is great to see. And one quick note on this is I have segmented the contact list a little bit more stringently because we do expect to be reaching out to potential vendors in the fairly immediate future. I've carved them out in one specific kind of bucket, and then there's other buckets for whether people are regulatory or policy people, if they're media or event people, or if they're folks who are kind of helping us, our subcommittees. That's all in there now. That's all I had to say on that one. Unless any questions, we'll keep moving forward here.
Very good.
Excellent. Next item on the agenda, this is just a quick verbal update, but we do have a updated web presence now. Steph and the team has helped update our website. I know that there was some feedback. It was a little stodgy the first time around with just a list of documents, but we're working to make it a bit more lively with links to social media, links to a newsroom, links to a live calendar. So if people have a chance to take a look at that and let me know if they have any feedback, or I'm happy to hear it. One quick note on this that I'll make is I've received a number of messages from people trying to access the webpage. If you are trying to access the webpage, please make sure you do navigate to stabletoken.wyo.gov. If you are trying to access the website from an old link, we tried to decommission those. Some of them are still hanging around, which is going to throw an error message that you're not able to get into the page. But if you go to the wyo.gov site, you'll be able to get in without issue. Any further questions on the website?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keep moving forward. So moving on to recruiting update. I am happy to announce that as of yesterday afternoon, we made a offer and have a verbal acceptance for our Chief Financial Officer position. So I'll stay relatively tight-lipped about that for the time being until we get through the formal onboarding processes. But I look forward to having another member of the team on board and continuing to accelerate the progress that we're making. We also have our Chief Information Security Officer position. Myself and some other commissioners have gone through that list as well, had a number of screening interviews, and we are moving forward with the more formal discussions in the immediate future. I will say that for those interviews, those will be within evaluation committee that I'm putting together. Again, because the CISO position is so technical, someone like myself, I can talk the talk, and I've certainly pushed a little bit of code here and there, but we need to have a couple of folks on these calls to do these interviews that have very deep technical experience. So we're certainly pulling in some people from our SMA groups into subcommittees and some of the additional friends we have on the periphery for that process. Any questions about recruiting?
Questions? Hearing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item on the list is a meeting memo, which is one of the documents you should have in front of you. We will the purpose of this is to very quickly look to get meetings on the calendar for the 2025 calendar year. This is a group of very busy people, so I want to make sure we kind of carve the dates out ahead of time to the extent possible. For this year, predominantly, we've had the third Thursday of every month in the morning in Cheyenne as our meeting time and place. If there's no objection to keeping that cadence and there's no objection to any of the specific dates on this list that you have in front of you, I don't think we approved this by vote last time around. This is kind of a soft approval, and we'll look to get things scheduled with your respective offices. So let me know if you have a chance to take a look at this, if there's anything that raises an eyebrow. But if not, I would just look to get these on the calendar and go from there. Commissioner Pope, you're looking at me. I'll read your mind for a second here. Through the chair, I will read your mind, of course. April 17th is the date, so I'm assuming you'll be well rested from April 15th, a day or two before.
Mr. Chairman.
Please, Commissioner Pope.
I anticipate having slept for a couple hours prior to that meeting. My other question would be if we need to tentatively plan an accelerated cadence as we look toward issuance.
It's a good point. I don't know, Director, if you have thoughts on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Pope. My take is I would keep these as kind of the first salvo. My personal opinion, and I think we'll start talking about procurement in a few minutes, this will become self-evident. I think any of the rushing we're going to need to do is going to be, rushing is a poor term, but any of the acceleration we're going to need to do is going to be in the fairly immediate future or near term. From my perspective, we need to get through the pre-qualification process and we need to get to the RFP process. Once those are done and we have engaged counterparties, I don't believe there's going to be such an onus on us to put everything down. We'll have the foundation in place. We'll have support teams working with us. I think some of the challenges or the perceived difficulties around timing are because we're trying to get so much accomplished up front. And once we're through that initial task, my sense is things will be a little bit more relaxed.
Commissioner Pope, just thinking about that, I'm anticipating that February, March, and April, there might be something in late January. Just because I imagine that once we get those pieces put in place, then it's probably pretty straightforward to the end, but we can do that the May and June on an ad hoc basis if necessary, but it might make sense to think about just saving some time in those months, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does. I agree.
Okay. Director, I don't think any of us really have, I know I don't have my calendar open before me, and it would be ways, but maybe there is a way that we can put together a couple of just touch base and at least put them on the calendar, hearing no objections, that, if it's necessary, we have it. If not, free time is always wonderful.
Agreed, Mr. Chairman. So to make sure I'm understanding correctly, what we're talking about here is putting a couple of additional meetings in the beginning of the year.
Correct.
And then if we don't need them, we'll just deep six them.
Right.
Okay.
Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I know the auditor and the treasurer and I don't have much going on during that time, so.
I heard that much, Mr. Chairman. There is one thing I will mention. I did not include a January meeting on here because between having a commission meeting on December 19th and then the next one would be January 16th, between the holidays, the upcoming session, and also the fact that we would expect that pre-qualification, the request for proposal period, those would be coming in back to us during the submission period. I don't think that we would necessarily need to have a mid-January discussion, and perhaps maybe this speaks to your point where late January and perhaps
Early Feb.
yeah,
Yeah.
we put another one, we push it there. I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I will work with your respective offices and we will go from there on that. And thank you again for your flexibility on this.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think
Commissioner.
it would be, I think, advantageous if we would have one meeting just to talk about how the state government could, or optionalities that we might consider of using the stable token, because I think people say we're the low-hanging fruit, but I think that a lot of that fruit's quite a ways up on the tree, as far as trying to use the token in government or in taxes or in whatever. So maybe we could have something like that I guess at some time. So we're kind of at least have a direction that we might consider.
Thanks, Commissioner. Good idea.
And Mr. Chairman, I quickly will add, through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, that's something we could also consider having in a working group as well. If that's just a bit more of a tactical way to handle it, because again, a lot of the work we're doing with the business plan, token design, blockchain selection, these are things that'll functionally be done within the next month or two. So again, not trying to monopolize everyone's calendars, but there's other ways to kind of fit these things in that might be a little bit more tactical.
I'm just looking at the area expertise between us being in government that that's something that we should maybe tee up for those committees or something. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving forward, quick industry update from my side. Again, the total aggregate market cap of US dollar denominated stable tokens at this point is over $170 billion. A recent report from Andreessen Horowitz, also known as A16Z, they put out their State of Crypto report. They did an assessment of stablecoin transaction data and noted that stablecoin transaction volume reached $8.5 trillion across 1.1 billion transactions in the second quarter of 2024. In comparison, the Visa network processed $4 trillion of transaction volume across 59 billion transactions. So these are impressive stats. And I also bring up that specific report because the Wyoming Legislative Act, the DUNA Act, the Decentralized Unincorporated Nonprofit Associations, was referred to as a major policy win in that document as well. So congrats to our friends in the legislature. Speaking of Visa, Visa did announce they have plans to work with a Spanish bank called BBVA on a program that helps firms launch their own tokenized assets, particularly stablecoins. They've got a sandbox now, but expect that to be live in 2025. And sticking with the international lens here, we do know that a stablecoin issuer known as AED Stablecoin did receive a go-ahead from the Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates to do a dirham-backed stablecoin as well. So we're seeing that. Again, not a CBDC, something that is backed with fiat currency. And the BRICS conference is currently going on in Russia, and my understanding is they are potentially demonstrating the BRICS Pay system as we speak. So certainly keeping an eye on that as well, which is a network of other systems that use digital rails to move money around, kind of getting unified into one unified payment system. So keeping an eye on that. And here stateside, the big news is Stripe, the large fintech platform, acquired a stablecoin infrastructure company called Bridge for $1.1 billion, which I believe is the largest acquisition in the blockchain space to date. So that is my news update. I'm happy to answer any questions, and if anyone had any comments, I'm happy to pause here before we get into the subcommittee updates.
Any questions, any other color to add? Commissioner Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was also an article in Payments Magazine about the MasterCard CPO who is calling for a rethink of the entire payments technology sector using tokenization. And I've skimmed through the article. I have not read it, but it looks like Visa and MasterCard are both beginning to warm to the idea, I guess.
Either join or get beaten. Yeah.
Manufacture buggy whips or not.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr.
All right.
Chairman.
Thank you. Any other? Okay, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll keep moving forward here. So now, after a year of having myself monopolize these conversations, I'm very happy to turn it over to our subcommittee leads to give updates on all the fantastic work that is happening in those working groups. I'll quickly just give my piece here. I'm very appreciative of the support we've gotten from the commission as well as our subject matter advisors who have tagged in quickly, deeply to get a lot of great work done in a finite amount of time. So with that being said, from our technology subcommittee, particularly our working group on token design, Commissioner Pope, through the chair, would you like to kick us off?
Mr. Chairman, with your permission?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had 4 meetings so far, and the focus right now has been on researching the best practices for various functions, including minting, backing, issuance, redemption, burn and reissue, and freeze and seize, which take on an interesting character within our commission because we are also governed by governmental principles and as opposed to just private practice principles. We're looking at each function as to what's similar or different from privately issued incumbents in those respects that I already talked about. We're reviewing available information to inform the process, including open source smart contracts, listing criteria for domestic and international exchanges, and other aspects. We're looking at other features as well, like multi-chain integration, which came about from the mandate from the legislature that we look to deploy it across multiple blockchains. Yield distribution, it's requiring a legal assessment, but we want it to be technologically feasible should we choose to use that feature down the road. And then, of course, privacy and the balance, of course, which the privacy versus regulation and control that's something we've yet to really fully address until we have all of the facts and circumstances on hand, but that's a very important aspect of our search as well. So and in putting all of this together with the design, these features, all of them have to be incorporated into the programming, so to speak. So this is what we're looking at and what we're researching so far. Anything that I missed, Director Apollo?
Through the chair, Commissioner Popening, that was fairly comprehensive. Again, I will say these conversations are quite nuanced in how we're looking at all of these things. Privacy was one item you mentioned. That's got to be a balance for us between having visibility into data to make sure that there's no Wyoming stable tokens being used in illicit activity. At the same time, we want to make sure that the transactions that everyday people are doing are not necessarily easily surveillable, right? So I think that's a part of it. And then going deeper into that, we're looking at the token structure as a way to do that. We're looking at smart contract structure. We're looking at the blockchains themselves. So there's different flavors for any given one of these topics that we've brought up. So I think I'll double down on that. But beyond that, I think that was everything. Thank you.
Director and Commissioner Pope, just a thought, as we get closer, I know you're sort of doing the overlay at this point and looking at what the potentials are, but I would, and maybe Deborah Brooks could also weigh in on, sort of what the technologies are, what the scope of practices are, and what the benefits are that you have looked at, some detail that might be helpful generally. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, I think in particular, some of the matrices that we're producing would be valuable to look at and discuss on a broader level at some point. But I think this first step of developing the capabilities, developing the menu, so to speak, is very important. And really, it's kind of like everything. We're going to have a couple of dozen things. We're going to choose a few. We're going to throw out a bunch and move forward in building the one that's right for Wyoming.
And Commissioner, I think that's awesome. And I think your notion of a matrix would be extremely helpful, because under each category, that I think about this maybe as a transparency document for the public to understand some of the concepts, some of the ways that those concepts have been developed, some of the checks and balances, if you will, and try to make them very transparent to the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And one last comment. Yes, I think, and that'll be also key in any future. I know with me, it always comes back to the audit, but the development of all of that and all of those features and the control of those features and the monitoring of those features is, in my mind, one of the most important aspects.
Thanks, Director.
Mr. Chairman, I will quickly say that I've got good news, which is that much of this is already structured in a matrix format. So I think it'll be quite easy for us to turn around and get this to whenever our work is done here, to put it into a kind of a publicly consumable format. I'll make one quick comment, because it will apply to, I think, all of the subcommittees. Is across the discussions we've had, we've pretty much gotten to the end or near end of the raw amount of work to do and say, here's what we've been thinking for the last year. Let's get through all of this. And I believe the next few weeks we spent taking all of that content and then kind of recontextualizing it with the understandings we've gained over the last few months of this process, and move forward from there. And if I may suggest, I think a great example of that is our blockchain selection working group, which Commissioner Ravel is working on.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a member of the working group responsible for blockchain selection, I'm happy to provide this update on our progress. We're currently in the process of evaluating a group of 30 blockchains using both quantitative and qualitative metrics. The goal of the working group is to reduce this pool to approximately 3 to 5 blockchains, which will move forward into our procurement process. We've structured our selection criteria into 3 main categories. There is a binary criteria, which are essential qualifications. So to even be considered a blockchain must have existing stable token deployments and supporting infrastructure in place. The second sort of level of criteria is functionality assessment. And here we're using a rating rubric to evaluate each network's technical capabilities and usage. Examples of key factors are transaction costs, transactions per second, current volume, market capitalization, et cetera. And then third are additional considerations, which tend to be a bit more qualitative, but we're looking for aspects like aligned use cases, existing partnerships, history of illicit activity, and legal analysis to understand the implications of each blockchain. The process overall involves gathering a substantial amount of data, most of which is non-standardized. Our working group, which is led by Director Apollo, and our staff, which has grown to include the highly capable Ms. Brooks and Ms. Chan, is working diligently to compare and analyze this information in a way that ensures consistency and accuracy across all assessments. So in closing, we are hopeful that this structured approach will help us identify the strongest contenders, enable the issuance of a stable token on a blockchain that aligns with our goals and standards. And Mr. Chair, that's it for my comments. I'd invite Director Apollo or any other members of the working group to add any additional thoughts.
Thanks, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will give,
Treasurer.
Yeah, just looking at, you know, I've heard that some of these blockchains have a problem when they get to a certain volume, that their buffer fills up, and then there's a potential, I guess, problem where that, when it's outside of the buffer, it can be attacked. I didn't know whether there's any technology that would, we could add on to any of those blockchains, that if their buffer was attacked, it would flow over to a server or a storage area that we had, I guess, security measures in place, so we would be insulated from something like that.
Director or Commissioner. Director, I think you're indicating, please.
yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Commissioner Meyer, thank you for the question. What I think you're referring to is instances where people, sometimes malicious actors, sometimes if there's a popular transaction on a given network that people want to pursue, what happens is transactions will fill up in what's referred to as the mempool. Memory pool is the pool of transactions that are waiting to be processed. In some instances, there have been issues where people use that data to kind of front run others and try to extract value from a given block in that capacity. My understanding, and I'm going a little bit out on the edge here, but my understanding is this is less of a problem in some of the more scalable blockchains that we're assessing, because the transaction finality is so much more truncated. You're not exactly waiting for a block to fill up for a larger number of transactions, which then has some issues around timeliness. There are also companies that do monitor the mempool for this kind of like activity, and can work with you to detect whether or not you should be doing transactions at a given time because of it. I'm forgetting the name of a large one that's actually local down in Denver, I believe, but the short answer is there is technology to monitor those kinds of issues, but I would think we're trailing more to the side of using more scalable blockchains. Again, as Commissioner Revel mentioned, we are looking at, transaction throughput as one of our quantitative criteria. So, perhaps we have less of an issue with that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I guess with the trillions of transactions that are going on, I guess there was one of the scalable blockchains, I think, that did have a problem with, they just got overtaxed. They had more transactions in front of them than they could actually process. So I'm just I'm just curious that concerned that we keep our eye on that. Monitoring is one thing, but if there's technology, it would actually, I guess, truncate our transactions to a different process or store them in an area that was more secure than the waiting area that seems to be vulnerable.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that heard loud and clear. One of the very interesting risks of working in a decentralized environment. The name of the company I was looking for is called Block Native. They do a lot of this monitoring. So there are technical solutions to these technical problems. And I think we just need to be aware, much like we were talking about a minute ago about the privacy piece with Commissioner Pope. This is something where you could perhaps, there might be a specific blockchain-based solution. There might be application on top of it that may be the solution. So we just need to keep all of our options open and go from there.
Thanks. You were about to start on.
Just to keep it very quick, Mr. Chairman, I do want to mention again, in addition to all of our SMAs, we do have some assistance from the team at the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation, including Joey Marchand and Ijun Hall, who've been helping with a lot of the manual data entry. Again, there's a lot of research that goes into this, and it's not easy data to standardize. So I wanted to make sure I give them a shout out as well, because they've been hands-on with that. And I think that's about it from my side on the blockchain selection.
Very good.
Up next would be Commissioner Wallace to discuss the updates on the business plan.
Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The business plan group has gotten together three times now. I think basically we're starting with the draft that we originally had and basically just going through it page by page from the beginning. I think we quickly discovered that a half hour at a time was not going to work, so we've kind of expanded that to spend a little bit more time. And I also have to thank the subject matter advisors for the contributions they're making. They've put a lot of work into this and spent a lot of time reading through it, and their input is, I think, invaluable. So that has really been helpful. But so far, we like I said, we've kind of started going through this front to back. Some of the areas that we're hitting on is updating the new market data based on those numbers that are constantly updated. Looking at new and additional market challenges and risks that continuously change, and always and again, there's new and novel stable coins being launched, both onshore and offshore. So we're making sure we keep our eye on those. I think one of the things that we're looking to add is adding maybe a glossary to define some of the terms that we've that's unique to this area. We're also looking at the steps and the phases that we need to take in order to leading up to and including the launch of the stable token. So that will be rebaselined with this report. One of the most valuable pieces in my mind is adding the financial projections to a business plan. So it's good news with CFO hopefully being brought on shortly, that will add a very important part to the business plan, and we will be working with the new CFO to get the financials in there. And also with Deborah's addition, the compliance part of it is certainly being enhanced now, and a lot of questions that we're having to address as far as it seems like that's another moving target, is making sure that we're dotting all of our I's and crossing our T's with the compliance. So our goal, I think, is hopefully have a updated version of that business plan by the next November meeting that we can share with the commission here, and we hopefully we'll have that to present at the next month's meeting. And that's about all I have to add. And Director Apollo, if you have anything to add, feel free. Thank you.
Director. Thank you, Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner Wallace. just to again, double click on one particular thing here. With the subject matter advisors we have on this particular working group, we have a very interesting lens on risk. You know, obviously we want to make sure that we are mitigating risks however and wherever possible. So it's interesting that we have on that particular working group some people who are more academically focused and on the research side monitoring some of these things. And Mr. Treasurer, that's similar to what you mentioned a few minutes ago. You have people who actually have deployed their own blockchain programs. They've got the hands-on assessments. They know the things that happen when, you know, you're actually launching this type of technology and then you're hands-on with it. So that has been a great way for us to see both sides of the spectrum when it comes to risk and incorporate all of that into the plan as we move forward.
Very good.
And with the last working group we wanted to cover off on this morning would be
Commissioner Pope, sorry.
My apologies. I should have raised my hand sooner. Mr. Wallace and Director Apollo, when you're looking at the financial projections, can you just briefly touch on how you're projecting both value and yield on within those projections? Have you gotten down to that granular level yet?
I can try to address that, and because it's, I think, pretty easy, and the answer is no. We have not started pretty much any of that. So I think we're kind of waiting for the CFO to get on board before we start digging into those types of numbers.
so, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Director.
Thank you, Tegan. So to Jeff's point, nothing formal yet, but I will say there have been multiple kind of starts and stops along the way. I know Commissioner Pope, you worked on some of them. I've worked on some of them. What I'm looking to work on immediately with the CFO is not just projections writ large, but defining what I think you're getting towards, which is different series of variables. The reason why I was so focused on scenario modeling experience during the CFO candidate search is because we're gonna need someone who can figure out how we're going to model interest rates that can go up or down pretty quickly. We need someone who's going to understand different digital asset markets and what those look like and how we can penetrate those, or if they're a little too ossified for us to get in. Use cases that we're going to pursue. So that's the goal, is to have all of this kinds of sensitivity analysis done pretty quickly, because that's going to be what drives a lot of the direction of when we start marketing this effort. You know, once the technical side of this is kind of coming together and we need to move forward on the use cases, right? That should be informed by financial analysis, and to a certain extent, the financial analysis itself could be its own type of marketing tool, in my personal opinion.
Commissioner.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate the detail, and I appreciate what both you and that, well, that whole subcommittee is doing. It's good work.
Thanks. Please, Director.
And Mr. Chairman, I wanted to mention one thing. I want to turn it over to Commissioner Revel for a second, because he's been, speaking of marketing, and again, we're not, you know, advertising and posting a ton on social media yet. We won't do that until we have a token that's ready to launch. But you know, we start talking about how we could have like a de facto marketing piece for all this. The business plan should be one way to effectuate that as well. And Commissioner Revel has had some great thoughts about how we could take some of the existing legislation that's been passed in the state, potentially attach it to what it is that we're building here and get that in front of others that way. But Commissioner, I don't mean to steal your thunder, so if Commissioner Revel wanted to speak a word on that.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Apollo. Yeah, during the business plan working group conversations, we've hit on the notion of the ability to create a more bankruptcy remote vehicle than would otherwise exist currently in the marketplace with the private sector offerings that are out there. And this is really more of a question or an idea for the commission to begin contemplating, as opposed to any conclusion. And I'll do my best to frame it. Please recognize I'm not an attorney and certainly not a bankruptcy attorney. But the idea is that if you are a private sector issuer today, say Circle or Tether, and for whatever reason, you get upside down with your financials and you fail, you're taken into bankruptcy. And what happens with the token holders' assets is not clear. And there have been not stable coin examples, but several examples in the digital asset world where bankruptcies or firms operating in the space have been taken into receivership, and clients or customers of those institutions who thought that their assets were being held in custody were actually, those assets were pulled into the bankruptcy estate, and they had to line up along with the other unsecured creditors of that financial institution to try and get their money back. So one, I think, very important point of differentiation that we could create with the Wyoming stable token is to ensure token holders, and probably the way that this is manifested is through our conversations with the rating agencies, and what the rating agencies opine on our stable token is to ensure that there is true bankruptcy remote protection around our reserves. So this raises an interesting question about the state of Wyoming and then also the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. So the state of Wyoming, based on my understanding of bankruptcy law, which admittedly is somewhat limited based on my conversations with those who do understand it well, is that the state of Wyoming cannot be put into bankruptcy. Bankruptcy code does not allow a state to be put into bankruptcy. However, the commission that has been created, which is an instrumentality of the state, there is an area in the bankruptcy code that would allow for our commission to go into bankruptcy. So the question is, and the way that the original stable token legislation was drafted is not entirely clear, are the reserves which are being placed into a trust, are those connected to the state of Wyoming, i.e. cannot be bankrupted, or are they connected to the commission, which could potentially, though highly unlikely, but could potentially be bankrupted? And I think if we can draw a connection either through clarification of the legislation or through some perhaps rulemaking capability that this commission might have, tie the trust account, which holds the reserves, to the state of Wyoming, as opposed to our commission, I think that would increase the likelihood that the rating agencies and therefore token holders would view this as truly bankruptcy remote and would be very much to our advantage vis-a-vis the private issuers that we'll be competing against.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that is a fertile field to discuss, and one that probably would be best served with a few attorneys being able to walk through this. You know, one of the big concerns, I think, is that the Wyoming stable token not become the tail that wags the dog of Wyoming, and it really is more like a tail on a water dog, very valuable. So further comments?
If I might follow up on that,
Yep,
Mr.
please.
Chair. Thank you. Yes, I agree. And as the legislation is currently written, it does not state that the trust account, which holds the reserves, is part of the commission, but neither does it state that it's necessarily, directly connected to the state of Wyoming. So it's unclear at this point where exactly, a rating agency or a token holder might view that this reserves trust connects. So I think that just a simple clarification there could be important.
Well, thank you. All right, Director, I think we'll take that under advisement. So,
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank Commissioner Revel for bringing the topic up. There are some heady topics in these working group conversations that come up, and one of the things that you had brought up in our last discussion was, creating some kind of Schelling point for all of these. And my personal take is that something like this will likely end up in the business plan when we describe the structure of what it is we're doing. And I would say any kind of more robust determinations that we as a commission are making, or you as a commission, I would say, are making, as a commissioner just said, likely that'll end up in some rulemaking piece as well. I think we're well within our authority to say this is how we're going to handle this. Well, here's what we say in the statute, but this is the interpretation if it's silent on that, and that can make it into the rulemaking process as well, particularly the reserves management piece that Deborah's working on as we speak.
right. Very good.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, through the chair, I would invite Commissioner Racines to bring us up on the procurement process.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think like the other subcommittees, this one has benefited greatly from the assistance of several subject matter experts. So just thank you to them. I think the procurement process is largely being broken down into two phases. The first being the pre-qualification process, which we've spoken about as sort of the funnel to which everyone goes, and then we, ferry out some of those so we have a more reasonable pool of folks that could be competing on the RFP. So of those two phases, the subcommittee is focusing on those pre-qualification qualities to determine in a couple different realms. It's looking like there's going to be potentially 4, one being technology, one being finance, one being legal and compliance, and then the last being operations. So still in flux a little bit, but we are looking to hopefully be able to launch the vendor pre-qualification forms at our November meeting, and then the RFP form would come after that, of course. So, and I believe that Director Apollo is going to provide a little more detail and timeline when we get to that procurement item on the agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner Racines. Director Apollo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner Racines. I will hold any other thoughts on the procurement side until we get to that stage of the conversation, because then we'll go through some of the dates and the specificity of what we're looking for along the way.
Excuse me just a second.
Yeah, before we move on procurement, I'm wondering, there's been some discussion that we may, onboard one blockchain or one provider or vendor, but then have contemplated that we would add additional blockchains or other vendors. So I'm wondering whether or not when you go through the process, are we gonna, I guess, issue RFPs to people for the first one, but maybe communicate to these people that it's our intention within the next 2 years to add another vendor or something like that. I don't know how we're contemplating, or if we're contemplating any communication in regards to something like that.
Director.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Meyer, that's a great question, because once again, there are many ways to skin that cat. For where we are right now, again, our goal is to take the large population of chains that are in scope and narrow it down to 3 to 5 rather than 1, right? Because if we narrow it down to 1, then we're at the behest of a small number of teams that want to propose the book of work. So we'll keep it to 3 to 5 that are competitive. And then even that will give us some optionality, right? Does that create a de facto prioritization list for us for the next chains we should be on. Perhaps it does, perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps these cross-chain interoperability protocols that are taking off and becoming more robust and stress tested, perhaps we just use one of those and that gets us the next 10 chains instead of having to focus on one chain and then the next chain. And then there's also, and this came up in the public comments from the last meeting that we had in Laramie, someone had asked about, we have a blockchain shop, it's a little bit smaller than maybe what you're looking for. How can we get involved with this? And one of the things that came to mind is, we did roll our procurement rules forward based on what the state construction department has. And we don't have this in ours because we're a little smaller in size and scale. But what the state construction department has is a system where they have a rolling qualification criteria. So if you are a vendor of X, they have, their criteria for that. And I believe you have to re-up every 2 years, but if you meet those marks, then you're good to go for whatever project comes next or comes your way. I think in due time, we could perhaps build towards something like that. However, there are so many moving parts to what we're doing right now, I wouldn't see that in the immediate future.
Thanks. Please go on with what you were.
Can do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, I can't see Deborah Brooks on the call. However, in terms of the next segment here.
She's back
here.
on.
I've been here.
Excellent. Thank you. Deborah, pleasure to see you. What I'd like to do is have Deborah give just a high-level overview about the work she's been doing on reserves management. Again, Deborah, I don't even think has been with us for a month, and yet she has taken a ton of initiative to go through many different frameworks and assess them. I always go down the rabbit hole and start stealing her thunder, so I'm going to stop doing that. And through the chair, Deborah, if you'd like to share a little bit of the work you're doing around reserves management and how that'll manifest into our rulemaking process, we'd love to hear it.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. First, I wanted to take the moment to thank Director Apollo, Chairman Gorman, and the commissioners for inviting me to join this incredible team and opportunity. I am so excited to contribute my skills and expertise to help drive this goal forward, and I look forward to growing together with the collective goal of, for the state of Wyoming to be the leader in stable tokens. So with that, my first task as Director Apollo referenced is that I worked to build out or develop a reserves management policy, which loosely and unofficially, it's being defined as a process to ensure that the fiat monies are readily available upon request by a stable token issuer. Of course, sound reserve management practices are important because they create trust and confidence with the Wyoming stable token, plus it increases resilience against shocks in this fast-moving, fast-paced market. To that end, as Director Apollo talked about, my first task was to review the relevant and either proposed or enacted stable token or stablecoin frameworks in other jurisdictions, both domestically and internationally. Presently, we have reviewed over a dozen jurisdictions that included the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS for short, the EU's or the European Union's Market and Crypto Asset Management, or MICA, or MICA for short. Of course, my old agency, the New York State Department of Financial Services, plus also bills that are currently pending before Congress, including Senators Loomis and Gillibrand's Stablecoin Act, the House Representative Patrick Henry's Clarity for Payment Stablecoin Act, the BIT 21, also known as the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century. And this month, Senator Haggerty proposed the Clarity for Payment Stablecoins Act of 2024. Also, we are reviewing, in addition to those other jurisdictions we are reviewing, we're also looking at those against the laws that the state of Wyoming has enacted and that we will follow. So just briefly at a high level, touch on some points. At least 5 jurisdictions have or propose some form of independent review, whether an audit or attestation by a certified professional. Another key loop or common theme is that the monies should belongs to the consumers and must be placed in either a segregated account and in trust of customer, which I believe is consistent with Wyoming law. And another step is that we observe that each jurisdiction are defining terms slightly differently from the other. So it is our goal to review them and streamline them to be consistent with not only Wyoming law, but also with industry standards. The next step that is currently underway is twofold, is to continue the review of the jurisdictional frameworks. We have, I believe, 2 more to review. And then we are currently analyzing the data to create a draft list of proposed policies. If there are any gaps or questions, I flag those to Director Apollo, to members of the commission, and really have the chance to make those internal decisions before we present to the larger group. So I just wanted to say thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your diligence and also for your report, Ms. Brooks. Are there questions? Comments? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director Apollo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The last bullet point we had on the agenda under upcoming subcommittees is legal. The goal for us is to re-engage with an external third party for the purposes of legal advisement. And I think we're just about there. So I would expect these legal subcommittee groups, which have already somewhat happened on an ad hoc basis internally with the Attorney General's office and others, to make sure we're kind of going down the right path here. I would expect those to be similar to the other working groups on a recurring basis, perhaps a week after next, but we would still keep the ball moving on this. Again, we do have a lot to figure out. We are doing world's first work here. So there are a couple of questions for us, similar to the ones that Commissioner Revel mentioned just a few minutes ago. So we are going to be pursuing that re-engagement as soon as possible. And I would hope to have that firmed up perhaps towards the end of next week. That's my piece on the upcoming subcommittees. Any questions on anything so far?
I don't see any.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on the agenda, we have our procurement section up next, and the next piece of paper you have in front of you is the proposed milestones memo, we'll call it for lack of a better term. I wanted to put a little bit more thought and color around this process following the conversation we had last month. I think it was a healthy dialogue where some folks identified where we could be moving potentially a little faster. Some identified where we may hit some roadblocks along the way. So what I've done with Steph's help over the last week and change is try to baseline this the best we could, figure out how we can align the work was happening in the subcommittees and the working groups with the approvals we can achieve through these commission meetings and getting things done with the lens on a Q1 2025 launch. So I will run through this at a high level, and then I'm happy to take any questions. But as Commissioner Racines mentioned a few minutes ago, the goal for us is to publish the vendor pre-qualification forms, we refer to here as VPFs, at our next meeting on November 21st. If we could approve those with the commission, I would publish those the next day. Again, we do have our procurement rules in place that allow us to host it on our website and push out emails from our accounts. We don't need to rely on anybody else. We can move faster there. I'd also want to give one more shout out to Steph. She was very helpful in setting up a distribution list for us with all the people we've been in contact with to date. We did a bit of a stress test with that, but now the function of the place we'll be in when we get to this point is we can hit one button and alert all of the 700-ish people I've talked to date that our procurement process is up and running, rather than having to reach out to several hundred organizations one at a time. So that's very helpful. I'll also mention, and this has come up in previous conversations, so it's captured here, we do expect for the vendor prequals that we will attach like essentially a blank template of one of our Wyoming state contracts. We want to be very transparent with anyone who might want to work with us about how we expect an ultimate agreement to be structured particularly, we're going to expect this amount of, insurance or cyber liability or insurance. So that's not a surprise. And also, we do expect all of these to be signed on Wyoming state paper, right? So if that's going to be a deal breaker for anybody, we should know from day 0 rather than day 100 of this process. So the goal is to push out those pre-quals at our next meeting. And for those who've been on the procurement working groups, you likely know that we've identified about 30 functions that we think we'll need. We've identified criteria, quantitative criteria for all of them. We've gotten the first mass of feedback on what we've put down on paper. And the goal over the next few weeks ahead of this November date is to, again, take it from the top with a cleanup effort, rebaselining any of our criteria, and then putting it into a formal survey. So that's the vendor pre-qualifications. Once we get those live, there will be 2 kind of overlapping segments of work. So we expect, we're giving vendors 3 weeks to submit their pre-qualification criteria, which we believe is appropriate because these are fairly binary facts. Either you can or cannot accomplish this, or you do or do not have this kind of transaction volume or what have you. They will just simply tell us yay or nay. And in that capacity, the pre-qual should be a bit more truncated, and of course the RFPs will be more robust. In our procurement rules, we do have a minimum 2-week period to advertise the pre-qualification. This is 3, so we should be fine there. While that vendor submission period is ongoing, we will concurrently run the review process for those submissions. Reason here being we can do this on a rolling basis. Our procurement rules do allow us to have an evaluation committee, so we can appoint those people for this many people on this particular topic. And as things come in, we can triage them that way. And again, it should be a little easier because these are binary yay or nay determinations. We also have 1 week, since it's a 4-week process, we have a 1 week where there's nothing coming in and we could just simply review things if we need to. And that again will be ahead of our December meeting. So at the December meeting, the determinations of qualifications from the evaluation committee will be presented, and the commission will be the ultimate arbiters of that, but that information will be presented. And then we would have functionally the list of qualified candidates for any given piece of the work. We also look to concurrently run the drafting of the RFPs while we are expecting those vendor submissions. Again, the RFPs are going to be downstream of the pre-quals, which is to say we're already functionally working on them by working on the pre-qualifications. And we've got a great number. We probably have several hundred questions at this point for the RFPs. So it's going to become more of a consolidation effort at this point than anything else. The goal would be to have the commission approve the RFPs on that December meeting date as well. Similar to the pre-quals, that Friday after the commission meets, I'll hit a button. We will let all of the qualified vendors know that they've been invited into this process, and then we take it from there. And this is where we're going to give them a bit more breathing room for the submission. We have a 6-week period for the qualified vendors to respond to the commission's request for proposal from December 20th through January 30th. One of the reasons why we want to give a bit more breadth here, well, there's 2 key reasons in my opinion. One is based on the amount of features and functions we know we need and the manner in which they're going to be consolidated into one RFP for technology that might have a lot of moving pieces, we do again expect that the work will likely be delivered by a consortium of vendors, not one specific vendor. We would hope that one vendor would lead the pack in terms of their communications with us and project management, but the expectation is that there'd be a number of groups consolidated into one. So they need to kind of figure out, and I would assume that they would come together for the pre-quals, but if they need time to ossify together, we give them that. The second reason why I wanted to do a little bit longer period here is to give them flexibility, and I forget which one of our commissioners mentioned this in the working groups, but as much work as we're doing around design, there's always going to be known unknowns, and there's the potential that, and perhaps it was Mr. LeBlanc with the Treasurer's Office talking about fund structure, right? Even if we propose, we want, in an RFP, we want a fund structure that looks like this, we may have a counterpart come say, well, if we do it like Y, like we can in-house, you get 92% of the functions you're looking for and it's half the cost. We don't want to disavail ourselves of that optionality. So we want to give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. If it takes a few more, a week or 2 more for us to get that kind of input from our financial partners, from our technical partners, I think we want to leave some breathing room there. Once those RFPs come in, we again would have evaluation committees set up to review all of those. We'd have a 3-week period to do that. Again, my assumption would be there'd be multiple evaluation committees depending on the RFP, so we'd be able to kind of divide and conquer here. We'd expect interviews to happen during that 3-week period as well, which is why I kind of skipped over a couple points here. Going back to the RFPs themselves, we would expect when those come in for firms to give us their availability for interviews during that 3-week window, so we know and we can book that all out. We also expect the RFPs to include, again, these kind of template contracts, perhaps with a scope of an engagement inside of them. And we'd also perhaps, again, if I had my druthers here, stipulate however possible that when organizations wanted to submit their RFPs, if they're going to, they know they're going to go down that path, we would hope that due diligence would start on us as an agency when they go begin their proposal process. What I don't want to have happen is we get to the finish line with someone, we're talking engagement, and then they tell us it's 3 months to get through diligence, or we're almost there and there's something that happens at the last minute that would kind of break things apart. We want to, again, de-risk and get in front of all of that to the extent possible. So I did put a note in here that we should have some kind of clause stipulating that if you're going to submit this, our assumption is your diligence has already started. And then, again, there will be some onus on us to provide documents, I'm sure, but we can prepare for that. Moving forward from February, again, we've got this 3-week period from January to Feb to get reviews done. We'd spent a month looking to engage the vendors that we had selected through the input evaluation committee, the ultimate determination by the commission. And then here's what probably the most controversial date on here. To lock in the Q1 date, I do believe that if we have everyone engaged by mid-March, we could, my personal opinion is we could have a Wyoming stable token on a test net, not reserved, but a live token on a test net that we could touch and play around with by the end of March. This is functionally, open source code. It's not difficult to deploy. So I think that's very feasible. Then we give ourselves a bit more breathing room when it comes to beta testing a fully backed token. I've got 2 phases here, a beta launch where the token would be perhaps geofenced to the state of Wyoming to start as we test out its capabilities. And perhaps we can identify different citizens who want to use this, potentially different entities in the state of Wyoming that are digital asset focused and can be early stress testers for us. And then by June 30th, a full launch where we are functionally everywhere. And I know that's a lot, but I think I wanted, just based on the way the conversation went last month, I wanted to put some color on how we could bring this forward in a timely fashion. And this is what I came up with. So I would love any feedback from the team.
I'll have Commissioner Pope and then Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Apollo, thank you. I love this kind of timeline. What I would be interested in is the list of identified variables that you have that could cause the timeline to be pushed back. Thank you.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pope, and thank you. I do recall that feedback from the last time around as well. From my perspective, those variables are myriad, right? That could be everything from, delays in onboarding team members to, a blockchain that we are looking to, in our top 3 selections gets hacked, right? There's functionally anything and everything could be a delta here. So if you want, let me rephrase this, to put together a cohesive document about everything that could possibly go wrong would be a little bit tough because there's a lot of known unknowns. If you were curious about kind of big blockers perhaps that were attached to some of the work that's already on our path, I'd be happy to kind of have that conversation.
Commissioner, follow up or?
Thank you. That's wonderful. I would love to have that conversation because I believe it would be beneficial at some point, given personnel available and all of that, to develop that list and potential remedies for each major variable. We don't have to get down to the point of the minutia. But the major variables, I think it's important to document what those could be and what the potential remedies and potential delays they could cause. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Meyer.
Yeah, just looking at the geofencing, are we gonna, I guess we could, I guess we're contemplating that it could be minted outside by a vendor outside of Wyoming, but as far as the use, that would be geofenced as far as the people that buy it in Wyoming, and that all purchases would be in Wyoming.
Through the chair, Commissioner Meyer, it is more of the latter. You know, the state of Wyoming is always going to be the issuer of the token.
Yeah.
Legally speaking, we'll also likely have the process in place to do some kind of minting in state. There's a couple ways you could do this. There's, again, every time I think you have a question, there's like 3 different answers we can go down, but such is the nature of this technology. I mean, we could do things like IP detection to make sure people are in the state, but they're, you know, that's one method of doing it. We could have a whitelist to start, which is saying these are addresses of people who've been KYC'd. We know who they are. We know where they are. And that is one way to, you know, kind of kick off and do some beta testing. My personal opinion is that's not the way to scale this program to the way it would need to be ultimately, but that would be a great way to get started. And there are perhaps 1 or 2 other ways to think about this, but, you know, I want to make sure that we're clear that we're going to have a nexus in Wyoming for the minting and issuance of this.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Racines, Commissioner Revelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to add to Director Apollo's thoughts there, and it is somewhat parallel to the idea of the whitelist, but to the extent that there are partners that we would engage with who would be reissuers, if you will, and potentially having those partners be based in Wyoming, and we are issuing directly to them within Wyoming. I think that would also be a very effective way to ensure that this is all happening within Wyoming. You know, perhaps as Director Apollo said, not the ultimate scalable solution, but one way in order to ensure that, and also bring in some key partners who would be kind of distributors or reissuers of the stable token.
Thank you, Commissioner Revelle. Commissioner Racines.
Mr. Chairman, real quick, Director, I think under item number 5, RFP submission, I don't know that this changes the overall timeline, but just for staff management, you may consider adding in the question and answer period as, you know, which is accommodated in the RFP process for all of these proposers to ask questions. I've just found that that's something that eats up a lot of time in that. So typically they'll be, and especially if we do go through I think this is common practice in all RFPs, but in the state system, if we put those out on there, the vendors are gonna have the opportunity to propose questions to which we have to respond. And it's a time suck. That would be my only suggestion.
Through the chair, Auditor Commissioner Racines, my apologies. Good point. What I will note is we do have our own procurement process here. So I think it'll be a bit more streamlined perhaps than going through the existing platforms, which when we did our RFI process, there were some hiccups there. But I think in terms of the feedback generally, you know, it's a good point. I do think with a 6-week period, I think we should be comfortable, but I am happy to add that in here as kind of another rationale for why we're giving a bit more time.
And Mr. Chairman, I think, okay, thanks for that reminder, but I think whatever platform is being used, I think vendors will have the expectation that they have the ability to lodge questions before they respond.
And through the chair, I think Auditor Racines the key takeaway here is to make sure everyone has the same information at the same time, right? So even if we are not using, a given platform, we don't want to be a situation where I'm answering direct emails and not giving that information to others, right? That's going to be the crux of it, is whatever comes our way and gets answered needs to happen in a roughly public forum.
Very good. Further comments, questions? All right. Commissioner Meyer had another meeting he had to attend, so to just note that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to quickly move on. We're going to stick with the theme of procurement here. You've got two more documents in front of you. One is the procurement rulemaking memo, and then you've got the procurement rules that we passed under emergency rulemaking in July. We're getting pretty close to the 90-minute mark here, so I'm going to kind of quickly accelerate this. Net, what we've got going here is we have a set of emergency rules around procurement that were promulgated in July. So these are only in place until November. What I've put in front of you is a memo that suggests authorizing the executive director to go ahead and file these rules for another 120 days of emergency rulemaking, which is the second and last time we can accomplish that, and then go forward with regular rulemaking, which will require collaboration with multiple different offices, but isn't that functionally I did before the first time around for this process? And I'm more than happy to do again. I just want to be cognizant that we are going into the procurement cycle here and want to make sure that we're well covered with these rules. So there are some recommendations on the back of that singular page, but happy to answer any questions on any of this.
Thank you, Director. I think we all understand the need for the extension. If there are motions to be made, I'm happy to entertain them now.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to make the motion. Director, remind me, back when we passed the emergency rules, did we not go ahead and authorize the regular rulemaking process at that point? Maybe we didn't.
Through the chair, Commissioner Reese, it's possible that we did. But since we are here now, I figured
Do it again?
perhaps the second time is the charm.
We do it nice because we do it twice.
Okay,
So-
Mr. Chairman, I would move the two directors' recommendations then, the first being to extend the emergency rules by do the 120-day extension, whatever is necessary to activate that, and then authorize or reauthorize the executive director to pursue the regular rulemaking process for that same set of procurement rules.
Members of the commission, you've heard the auditors, the Commissioner Racinus's motion. Is there support for it?
I would second that.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Pope. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Nays? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From here on, I think we can start winding down from my perspective. In terms of next steps, I feel like we've talked significantly about the pre-quals and the RFPs, so we'll leave well enough as is. We've talked about when those meetings are going to happen here in the Wyoming Capitol Auditorium on November 21st and December 19th. With that, I would turn it over to you for the public comment session, but I will quickly say the duration of public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per speaking party or 1 question from an online participant. Speakers will also be asked to provide their first and last names for the public record.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Is there comment to be made here in the room? And then I'll go to Zoom. Any comment? I don't see any on Zoom. Is there any?
We have a few comments in chat.
Yeah, it's definitely.
So from Sally Jones, she asked, with the BRICS nations meeting this week, with the stated agenda of one, accepting nations within their group, and two, their stated plan to remove the US dollar as the world reserve currency, have you considered basing Wyoming token on gold rather than the US dollar, which is in a precarious position globally? And if no, then why not?
Thank you. I'll leave that to Director Apollo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To quickly repeat the question, is there a consideration of backing Wyoming stable tokens with gold instead of dollars? From my perspective, we should be fighting for the power of the US dollar, and I think stable tokens are an amazing way to do that. For reasons that have been discussed in these conversations a number of times, what I will quickly say is, if we were to build this program out over time, there could potentially be, asset-backed tokens in the future. But for now, there is a roadmap to follow for dollar-backed, fiat-backed stable tokens, and that's what we're going to follow.
And Director, if I may, I'd also point out that the legislation is specific to the securities that we're contemplating. I think there was discussion not only of gold, but also of natural resources and other ways that we could back the asset. There was some concern about volatility, and we wanted to make sure it was fully reserved and plausible. So I agree with you. I think there's room to be able to think about these things down the road, but so far the legislature's only given us the one option.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for clarifying. I should have given my response in that order as well. If we go back to the statute, yes, we are limited by statute to invest in cash, so US dollars, US Treasury securities with 1 year or less to maturity, or US Treasury security repurchase agreements with 30 days or less to maturity. That being said, further above in the statute, when the statute enumerates the abilities of the commission, it does say that we have the ability to determine what kind of characteristics of a token would be. So there is a door that is open for the future, but for now we have a pretty strict remit.
Thanks. Steph, any further questions?
Yes, question from Brian Foster. Is the list of blockchains being evaluated available to the public, and is there a formal process to be added to the list?
Dr. Apollo.
Mr. Chairman, that is not public at this time. It is part of our working group assessment, so it's pretty consistently shifting. That being said, I think the feedback we heard from the commission earlier in today's conversation, as well as I think just keeping with the tenets of transparency, is when we make our determinations, we should be very forthcoming about how we got to where we ended up. And I would say there's quite a few criteria that we're looking at to make these decisions. I think there's probably about 24 different metrics, both quantitative and qualitative, we're looking at.
And Director Apollo, just if I may opine a little bit, and maybe Commissioner Pope has a view on this, or Commissioner Racinas or Commissioner Ravel, I think we want to be very mindful. I think we want to be transparent, but at the same time, as we come closer to fruition, the potential for in some, though we're not a market instrument, the potential for us to, in some ways, perhaps favor one or indicate that we favor one over another might be a market manipulation. I think we want to be very mindful that we don't do that.
Totally agree.
Oh, okay. Another question? Yeah, do we have, can the individual, okay, thank you.
Pete Fox asked, with the broad brush, what are the significant revenue streams expected from YO stable tokens? I'm assuming trading the coins on an open market will have limited arbitrage opportunities, having the coins pegged to USD/UST. However, fees for using the coins seems to be a appropriate revenue stream? A secondary question is, who's the target market?
Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in terms of revenue streams, I'm assuming, maybe I didn't understand the question completely, but I'm assuming when we talk about revenue streams, he's meaning for the state. And in that capacity, as I mentioned a moment ago, the underlying securities that back the Wyoming stable token are going to include interest-bearing instruments such as U.S. Treasuries and U.S. Treasury purchase agreements. So that's the methodology by which we would be generating some kind of revenue stream from the stable token program. It's unclear if we would apply any kind of fees to this. There are, of course, many levers to pull along the way. What I would say is, while not completely disavailing ourselves of any of them, that putting fee structures in place if other incumbents don't have fees would be, strike against us. So we just need to be mindful of, generally speaking, the market structure and who else is doing what. And then in terms of the target market, the goal is to be functionally where most incumbent stable coins are now. Of course, we need to be very mindful of how compliance is going to look different for us than the private incumbents, but we would like to be used in very much the same manner as many of the ones that are currently used in compliant manners.
I think that's a fair assessment, and I would only add that I think the intent was never to sort of, our intent was never to make this an investment that the state was going to try to profit off of. There is a view that the mechanisms by which we're going to reserve actually provide some, as you point out, interest, and that was the intent here, was to be able to provide for the program, maybe make a little bit more, but not look at trying to manipulate anything to the benefit of the state. One more question.
Oh, no, this is from an anonymous.
So we're, okay, thank you. Very good. Further? All right, if there is nothing, Director, more to come before us, I want to thank Ms. Brooks for being here, for commissioners attending. Stephanie, thank you very much. And if there's any final comments that you have to make, I'll turn it to you, and then we'll take a...
No further comments from my side, other than just to thank everyone for their time. Thank the team at ETS for helping set this all up, as we're in a bit of a transition here on our side. And I look forward to getting our heads down to get these pre-qualifications ready for next month.
Very good. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved by the Commissioner Racines.
I'm happy to second.
It's been seconded by Commissioner Pope. It's kind of a pattern here. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We are adjourned.